So alright, this is the application that we're making. In this particular application, we'll be learning about how to use React Router DOM to navigate between pages, as well as we'll be using the theme provider to switch between or toggle between the themes, that is the dark theme and the light theme. For example, if I just click on this little moon button over here, I might switch to my dark theme, and when I just click on it once again, I am again inside my light theme. At the moment, I'm in the home directory, that is the default page. Now, if I just, this is the default home page. Now, if I just move into my about page, so this is our about page, and you might see in the URL section that I'm inside my about. So this is the about page that we are in right now. Now, if I just move into my user section, you might have seen a loading screen for about some seconds. Now we are getting this data. Now where are we getting this particular data from? This, you might see that we are having a total of 10 data sets, I mean 10 people and their data. So where are we getting this data from? We are getting this data from the JSON placeholders, so JSON placeholder.typecode.com, and we will be getting a fake JSON data from over here. This is just some sort of mock API. Now let's just go back, and if I just click on this particular person, for example, it's Lean Graham, and if I just click on this person, here is Mr. Lean Graham, and the username and the email that he's using, his address, the street, the suit, the city, and the zip code, as well as his phone number and website and all those particular details, along with his photograph. Now this photograph is not something that this JSON placeholder is going to give us. This is just some random photograph fetched from Pixabay or Unsplash, so you can use it according to your need. Now if I just move into my contact section, so yeah, here you can see the contact form. Now where have we made this form? So this form is made with the help of Formic. Feel free to take a look into the documentation. It's really nice. It's really nicely documented. And if I just move into my application at the moment and I just try to enter name, for example, if I just enter the name, maybe John Doe. All right. So now what if I just try to enter some fake random email? For example, if I just enter John Doe. All right. So this is the email. So it's going to ask me to enter a valid email. And what is a valid email? That includes an ampersand as well as maybe a gmail.com. So yeah, that validation is gone. So where is this particular validation coming from? For that particular purpose, yeah, we are using this yup as a validation library. It's really nice library. It saves us a lot of work and saves. So yeah, we are using yup, Formic, and JSON placeholder. So these are the primary three contents that I needed to discuss with you. And this is the optional phone number and website and this message. And I can send this particular messages after I have actually mentioned them. So this is all about application that we'll be building. I will be creating a React app. I know we haven't talked about React yet, but yeah, it might come in handy to have a React application by your side when you're trying to learn React. Now we'll be using the CRA utility of Facebook to create a React app. And believe me when I say this, that there are quite many ways to create a React application. You can start everything from scratch. You can now install npm React, then React DOM, and then Babel. But that is going to be a lot of work, and CRA utility really saves us a lot of work. All you have to do is run 3 commands to create a React app. Now there are certain prerequisites, and the CRA utility also has a really nice documentation. If you want to take a look at this, you can do so. This is the CRA utilities documentation. You can get started if you want to. Now, apart from this, there are certain prerequisites. One of them is that you need to have Node installed on your systems, which I'm going to presume that you already have. But if you just don't, then download it from the official website. At the time of recording this video, we are using 16.13.2 long-term support. Now after this, we'll be also needing code editor. You can use Visual Studio Code if you want. It's really a nice code editor, but if you have some personal preference like Sublime or Atom, feel free to use that. But VS Code really comes with a lot of features that we are going to use inside of our application. Alright, so now we'll be creating a React app. So to create your React app, just fire up your terminal or command prompt. And the 3 commands that we need are npx create react app. So npx create react app. followed by the name of your app. So React router demo. So React router. So this is the name of our React application that we are using. So React router app. Now hit enter. It is going to take some amount of time to create your React app. And once it's done, we'll be moving into our app directory and launching a terminal from there. So all right, now we see that our application has successfully been created, and we see that there are these 4 commands. One of them is npm start and then npm run build. So what npm start does is that it is going to launch a server, and you can open your application on localhost 3000. Now npm run build, this command is used when you want to push to production. That means you want to deploy your application onto some site. For example, you want to deploy it on Heroku or maybe Netlify or AWS. So at that particular moment when you have actually completed your application and you want to create a build version, then you actually run npm run build. Now npm test, this is to create test runners, and npm run eject. All right, so now we are going to do as the documentation suggests. We are going to move into our directory, that is cd react router app. So let's just move into a directory, cd react router app. So all right, now we are inside of our application. Now we are going to launch our terminal, and for that purpose, let's run the command npm start. So npm start, and if you're having yarn or you have made this application with yarn, then you might have to run yarn start. But since I have made this application with npm, therefore I'm going to run npm start. So all right, now our server is running on localhost 3000, and a window might have popped up with localhost 3000 already loaded into your browser, and this is what the CRA utility or the create react app utility gives us: a spinning react logo and 2 texts. Now I will be taking a look into our application folder. So for that purpose, let's close our server, and to do that, just press Ctrl plus C to close off your server. So Ctrl plus C. This is going to ask you whether you want to terminate your job or not. Just click yes. And then after this, we'll be opening up a VS Code instance of our application. And to do that, run code with a period. So code with a period. This is going to open up a VS Code instance of our React router app. Now hit enter. So this is our React application. We are having this node modules folder, this public folder, and the source directory. Now this node modules is going to contain all the node packages that we are having inside of our application. So if we just take a look into our package.json, so these are all the create react app dependencies or the npm dependencies that has already been installed for us. We have this react dom, and react scripts, and we have these scripts as you saw before: the start script, the build script, and the test and the eject script. Now let's just take a look into a public folder, what lies in it. So if I just open my public folder, we are having this icon that is going to appear when we open our application. So this little small icon is what we call to as the fav icon. Now let me just go back into my application. So we have named it as favicon.ico. Now let's just open this index.html. So this is our index.html. So what you can see, that you can see a head tag and some meta tags. Now if I just scroll down, we'll be seeing a div with an id root. So now this is the place where all our compiled code is going to be dumped up inside this particular div with the id root. So let's just go into our source directory. This is going to contain, this is the place where we'll be spending most of our time in. We'll be coding entirely in this particular directory. Now if I just move into my index.js. So now inside the source directory, we are having quite a many files. We are having our app.css, we are having our app.js, and some other files. Now I want you to get rid of all the files except your index.js, index.css, and report web vitals, and setup test.js. After that, we'll be starting with our application. Now let's get rid of this app.css. We do not need we do not need 2 CSS files. We'll be writing our entire CSS into one. So either it can be index.css or app.css, it doesn't matter. So now let's just delete this app.css. All right, so now let's get rid of this logo.svg as well. So all right, that's all that we need to do. Now if I just scroll back into my application and hit refresh. So all right, now we are having this error that says that can't resolve app.css, and that's valid. I guess we have just removed our app.css as well as our logo.svg. So it's only natural that it is not being able to find it. So let me just close this, and now what you're going to do is that now if I just move into my browser, we'll be having the similar error over here only. Now let's just get back and let's get rid of all that is in here. So let's just remove them and now hit save. All right, so now let's create a hello world component as a starting ritual of any programming project. So import, we'll be importing React from React. So import React from React. All right, so now we'll be creating a component, and it's totally up to us whether we want to create a functional component or a class component. So we'll be opting for the functional component. So let's create a function with the name of app. All right, a functional component is going to have a return statement. So return, and inside this, let's pass a div, and this div is going to have an h1. So h1, and it's going to have hello world. All right, so this is our return statement, and it is having a div as a parent, and inside this parent we are having this h1. So now we also are in requirement to, okay, so this should be from, not from. So importing React from React. All right, so now we also need to export this component. Export default app. All right, so now let's just hit save and take a look into our application. So let me just scroll down. So it's compiling. Now where is this app.js being called? So as you might recall that I already shown this to you. Inside of our index.js, we are importing our app. All right, so here we are importing our app as well as our index.css. So let's just head back into our app.js. Successfully compile our application. If I just take a look into my application. All right, so it's loading. So basically it is having a hot module replacement. That means we do not need to manually hit refresh. So here is our hello world. All right, so inside of our source, we're going to create a folder with the name components. So this is going to contain all the components of our application. So the components, and inside this component, we're going to have multiple folders, and those are basically going to be the components of our application. One of them is going to be our home page. So let's create a component with the name home page. So basically this is the first page of our application. So home page. All right. After this home page, we're going to have another component inside of a component, and that is going to be about page. So about component. So about, and after this home, we have this about, as well as we are going to create another component with the name form. So as you might have seen that what the form was. So let's create a contact name with the form. All right, so we are having these three components at the moment. We are having an about, a form, as well as a home page. Now a catch-all route that is going to contain all the, so let me create another component that is going to be error component. So if anyone direct themselves to any route that doesn't exist, so this component has to show up. So this is the error component. So we are having about, error, form, as well as our home page, and one of them is going to be footer now. So let's create a component with the name footer. It should be outside. Yes, I want to move it into components, and so have I. Now after this, we're going to create some other components that is going to be user as well as users. So let's create a file with the name user, and another file that is going to, and another file with the name users. So users. All right, so these are basically all the components that we need inside of our application. We are having our about, we are having our contact page, we are having our error page, we're going to have a form inside of our components, and a home page and a users page that is going to individually map all the elements to the user page. All right, so these are all the components. Now we also need a source provider or a theme provider inside of our application, because that is the thing that is being taught inside this particular project. So we'll be creating a context form or a context file inside of our source. Let's create a context. So basically this is going to set up a the top. So context.js. All right, so now we'll be starting up with our application, and the first thing that we're going to make is our context.js file. So now what basically is context? So React context is one of the features of React that has been made available to us from React 16. React context allows us to pass down and use data in whatever component that we need, and this actually basically saves us from prop dealing. Now, as you might recall that if you want to pass one data from one component to another component, you need to pass it via props. But with the help of context.js, we are saved from that particular work. So now there are certain use cases that you might have to keep in mind when to use context. One of them is that when you need to pass the theme data, for example, as we are doing now, we'll be passing our theme as well as the state of whether the application is in dark mode or in the light mode. So whenever you're using the theme data, then you can use context. Apart from it, you can also use context when you're using user data. For example, if you want to pass down whether the user is authenticated or not, just using libraries like Redux for passing down authentication object might not be a good idea. That's just going to increase your bundle size. So using context might come in handy. Now, we can also, with the help of context, pass down location specific data, like the language that the user prefer or the local. Now you should always take this into consideration that the data that you are placing inside the React context, that should not be actually be updating or a kind of data that changes quite frequently. As for the auth, it can change at certain time and it is going to be sign out for certain other times. So it is not that big of a deal. But if the data is constantly or frequently changing, then using React context might not be a good idea. Now, what problems does React context solve? So as I've already told, it saves us from prop dealing. So you might have heard of this when we want to pass down data from one component to other component, and there are quite many subsequent other components between those two particular components, then that has the possibility of creating a memory leak, which we obviously do not want inside of our application. Therefore, we'll be using now to start with our context. There are 4 steps to create a React context. Now, first step is so now let's just cover the steps that we need to take into consideration while creating a context. So one of them is that we need to create a context using create context method. So first we need to create a context object using create context. Now this is one of the methods that the React provides us with. So create context. Now after this, the second step is that take your created context and wrap the context provider around your component tree. So wrap around component tree, which basically we can do at the index.js or app.js, any one of these places. Apart from this, put the value. The third step is that we need to place the value that we need to pass down. Place the value that is supposed to be passed down. All right, so now after this, read the value from the component. Now once you have passed the value, read the value in the component that you intended that value to be passed to. So read the value of the context. So basically these are the rules of creating React context object. So now the first thing is that we need to create a context object using the create context method. So now the first thing that we're going to do is that we'll be importing our React as well as, so let's first import React from React. All right, now we'll be needing this create context method. So let's just import our create context. And after this, we're going to create a functional component. So const, and we're going to name it. All right, so now before creating the functional component, let's just follow our steps. That is to create a context using a create context. So now we're going to create a constant and let's name it theme. All right, so this is the theme. Now we are going to create a context using create context. So yeah, create context, boom, it's done now. We have followed the first step. successfully. Now after this, we have created a theme with the create context. Now the next step is that we need to wrap our component tree. But before we do that, let's create our entire context.js before we actually wrap it around our index.js file. So now we're going to create and the name of this function is going to be provider. So let's just name it provider because that's what it is doing. So provider, this is a arrow component. Inside this we need to destructure children. All right, now after this let's give it an arrow again, and inside this a return statement. All right, now let's export our provider as well. So export, why don't we actually export it right here? So export const provider. All right, so this is our component. Now inside this return statement we will be passing, as you might see in the third step, place the values that are supposed to be passed down. So before we do that, let's use other features of React, and that is we'll be importing our use state as well. So use state, because we need certain state or data or a piece of data to be passed to our context object, right? So now after this use state, we'll also be needing a hook known as use effect, and after this use effect, use context as well. All right, so this is what all imports that we need inside of our application. Now let's create an object const, and this is going to be named as theme. This theme is going to be having a setter function known as set theme. And this is going to be equal to use state, and we are going to use local storage in this particular use case to store the data of our state, that whether we are in dark mode or whether we are in light mode. Okay, so local storage dot get item, and inside this get item we are going to pass it theme. So theme or light. So all that, this is going to fetch our data. After this, what we're going to do is that we'll be creating a use effect hook. So now let's create a use effect hook. Use effect hook. So now let's talk about the use effect hook. So what is use effect hook? The use effect hook allows you to perform side effects on your components. And what these side effects are: for example, if you're fetching some amount of data from an API or any other place, and once you receive that data, you want your component to re-render, then use effect hook might be the perfect place to do that. But there are certain case scenarios that you need to consider before using the use effect hook. All right, so there are three case scenarios. One of them is that when you want your use effect hook to run every time or re-render every time. So this use effect hook, in which you're passing it with no other optional parameters, then this is going to run on every single re-render. So this particular hook runs on every render. Now there are certain other scenarios as well. For example, if you wanted to render or run on a single time when your component is being mounted. So if you wanted to run a single time only, and that is when your component is being mounted, single time only, and then what you're supposed to do is that you will be passing it with a second parameter, that is an empty array. Now there's a third case scenario. That means you want your hook to render or run only at that particular point of time when there's a certain change. For example, if you have fetched some amount of data from an API, then only you want to run your use effect hook. As in this case, we want to run our use effect hook only in the case when there's a change in theme. So what we're going to do is that we'll be creating up a use effect hook, and this is going to run two times. One, when the component is being mounted. So this is going to run the first time when the component is being mounted, and the second time it is going to run when there is any change in our state or dependency value. As in this case, we want it to run on every change in theme. For example, if our user has selected dark theme or light theme, so basically we want to run our use effect hook. So whenever there is change in dependency, so whenever there is change in dependency or some values. In this case, that particular value is a theme, so we want it to render on any change in theme. All right, so now let's get rid of these two use effect hooks. So these are all three cases that you should take a look into. Now let's just get rid of these two, and we'll be using this third use effect hook. Now let me just create some space. All right, so now this hook is going to run every time there's a change in theme value, as well as the first time when a component is being mounted. As you might have seen that at the moment we are not having any item inside of our local storage. Therefore, we are going to create that particular item. So let's whenever our component is being mounted, then what do we want is that we want the local storage. So not location, local storage dot set item. We want to set particular item into that, and this is going to contain item or theme as well as theme again. All right. Now after this, let me close this. Now after this, let's create a theme context provider or a theme provider. So theme dot provider theme dot provider. Let me get rid of this, and inside this will be passing it with children. So we'll pass in children. All right. Now, as for the third step, as you might have seen, place the values that are supposed to be passed down. So what we are passing down inside of our theme provider is our theme as well as the setter function theme, a set theme. So let's pass these values, and one better option to do, one better method to do this would be create a const values, and this is going to hold in our theme as well as our set theme. So set theme. All right, so this is what value is going to contain. Now let's pass these particular values. Values, this is going to be equal to values. Now we can also do like as if it's not necessary for you to create a value and pass them. You can individually also pass them. For example, if I have to pass in the theme, I will be creating theme and passing it with theme, and then a setter function set theme, then again set theme. I mean, you can do this either ways. You can create an object and then pass them, or individually pass them. I feel like as if creating up an object and passing them might be a good choice. So let's just get rid of this and pass in the value, which is going to be equal to our values. All right, so this is all about our application now. So now we have created an application successfully. Now there's, all right, so I need to surround it with, okay, now we're done. Now the last step is to create a use context object. So let's create it. So export const use theme, which is going to be equal to use context, and pass in the theme as well now. Now this is supposed to be an arrow function, so let's create it as an arrow function. All right, so now we are good. So this is our entire component, our context.js. Now let me get rid of these. All right, so this is our component. Now if we just take a look into our application, let me just undo this. Now we have created a context object now, and as well as we are passing it. Now the only two steps that remains are we have to wrap it around our component tree. That means we need to pass it. So the best place might be our index.js. So now we have successfully created our context.js. Now the one thing that remains is to wrap this around our index.js. So that's what you're going to do. So we need to import our this provider and wrap it around our index.js. So let's move into our index.js, and first let's import our provider. And this is at the root. So context. So we are importing it now. Now we're going to wrap it around our app.js. So let's create a provider. So this is what is going to make our theme available to all of our components. So now we are having this provider right above our index, I mean right above our app. That means it is going to be available to each and every one of the components, and if they want to use that, they just need to import this use theme from our context.js and they can use it. All right, so now let's head back and we'll be placing our app inside this provider. All right, so now we are set for the day. We have successfully created a context. Now we'll be moving in and downloading a few dependencies. But before we do that, let's first populate our other components. So let me just open up my components folder. And inside this, the first one is our homepage. So let's create a component, homepage.jsx. So homepage.jsx. All right, so we'll be starting with our homepage. The first thing that we're going to do inside our homepage is let's just make it a functional component. But before we do that, let's import React from React. So import React from React module. All right, so now this is going to be a functional component. So let's create a functional component, and this is going to be function, and let's name it homepage. All right. And after this, let's give it a return statement. So return. All right. So now is probably the time that we'll be installing certain dependencies into our application. We'll be using Bootstrap. So just open up your inbuilt terminal and let's install Bootstrap. Now, mind me, we are using the Bootstrap version of 5.1.0. So you'll be needing the same version because thing inside React are quite like Wild West. It might be this thing that something is working today and it might not work tomorrow. So for the sake of safety, so as a safety measure, I would want you to install the same version on which I am working. So let's just close this and open up our inbuilt terminals, and we'll be downloading all the dependencies that we need. And the dependencies that we'll be downloading are Bootstrap. So let's install our Bootstrap. So npm. All right, so npm install Bootstrap. So Bootstrap. And since we have to download one specific version, therefore @5.1.0. All right, so now this can also be shorthanded to npm I. So if you need to install a dependency, you can just run npm I bootstrap @5.1.0. So this is all we need. Now hit enter and it is going to install a particular dependency inside the application. And once it does, we'll be starting with the application. Now, since the dependency has been installed, let's create a parent container, and this is going to be a div. So inside this, a div, and give it a class name. And this is going to be, let's name it container. All right, now inside this container, let's create another div and give it a class name as well. This is going to be of class name row and my margin on the y-axis 3. All right, so this is a bootstrap. After this, let's create an h5 tag. So an h5 tag now, and this is going to have a class name as well. So let's give this a class name as well, and this is going to be of class name display -4. All right, now inside this is the home page. All right, so we are having this particular segment inside the container. We are having our another container that is div of class name row with margin top and bottom 3. Now after this, let's move out of this div and create another div, and this is going to be holding the class name that is going to be equal to row. All right, now inside this div, let's have a div as a container again. So inside this div, we are going to have another div, and this is going to be of class name that is going to be equal to call -1, or perhaps just call. Okay. All right. So now inside we are having two divs as two we are having two containers right now. Okay. Let me just get rid of this extra one. All right. So inside this div of class name row, we are having another div with the class name column or call. Now inside this div, what you're going to do is that we'll be creating an image tag. So let's create an image tag, and it is going to be holding the source. Now you can paste any random source, perhaps just download some image or get the link of some image from Pixabay or Unsplash. You can use any images that are in here. So I'll be leaving it empty for now and give it an alternative name as well. So an alternative name, home must be fine. So all right, give it an alt name and as well as a class name now. So we'll be also giving it a class name. So give it a class name as well that is going to be equal to width w100. All right, so now this image is going to have a self-closing tag. So let's give it a self-closing tag. All right. Now after this image, what we're going to do, we are going to move outside of our call div. That means this particular div, and we'll be creating another div with the class name call. So div, give it a class name as well now. So this is going to be of class name that is going to be equal to call again. All right. Now inside this div, what we're going to have is a paragraph tag, and this paragraph tag is going to have a class name. So give it a class name that is going to be equal to card text. All right. So now inside this paragraph element, we are going to have certain elements, and you might have guessed it what those are going to be. That's basically we are going to fill it with lorem ipsum. So let's grab some lorem ipsum and paste it in here. All right, so now I've added one particular image from an Unsplash. So here is my image source. It's one of the photos from unsplash.com. You can use any photos that you want. Now inside this card text, let's add it and populate it with some lorem ipsum. So you can just copy it from in the internet. You just copy it and paste it. After this paragraph element, let's create another paragraph tag. So this paragraph tag and give it a class name again. So this is again going to have a class name, and that is going to be equal to lead. We'll be adding CSS to it later on. Now let me just close this paragraph. All right, now let's just copy and paste this entire thing again in here. So copy this again, or perhaps some other lorem ipsum text, and paste it over here. So this is what all our home page is all about. Now I see that we are getting this error that says that we are not exporting our home page. So let's export it as well. So export default home page. All right, so we have successfully created our home page. So let me just save this. And after this, we'll be heading to our other components, and that is our about page. So inside the about, let's create a component, and this is going to be about.jsx. So about.jsx. All right, so now we'll be populating our about.jsx. This again is going to be a functional component. So let's create a function and give it a name about. And give it a return keyword, a return statement. So return, and inside this return, let's start populating our data. So first of them is going to be div, and give it a class name, and this is going to be container again. All right, let's close this. So this is the parent container of our component that is about.jsx. Now after this, we're going to create an h tag. So give it a heading 1 tag h1, and this is going to have a class name of display4. So give it a class name of display4, and text left. text hyphen left. All right, so now inside this, it is going to contain the information that states that this is the about page. All right, now after this, let's create another div, and this div is going to hold the class name that is going to be equal to row and again margin across the y-axis, so my. All right, so now inside this div we are going to have column, so another div, let's create another div, and this is again going to have a class name that is going to be equal to column. So let's create col medium md and 4. All right, so this is our div. Now inside this div we are going to have another div that again is going to contain an image element. So let's create inside this div another div, so this div, and this is going to contain an image tag that is again going to be a self-closing image. All right, so this div needs to have a class name now, so let's give it a class name, not children class name, and this class name is going to be equal to col again nd, but this time 6. All right, so now this image as well needs a source as an alternative name, so let's give it a source, and it won't hurt us if we just copy this particular source and paste it over there. So let's just paste it over here. All right, so this is our image source. Now this image as well as need an alternative name, so let's give it an alternative name as well. So alternative name, this, let's put it equal to about maybe. All right, now this also needs a class name, so let's give it a class name as well, and this is going to be equal to rounded and w 100. All right, so now Bootstrap is not a part of this course, so I'm going to assume that you are already familiar with Bootstrap, but they do really have a really nice documentation, and if you really want to know what all these class names are doing, feel free to just visit bootstrap.com. All right, now after this we are having this particular image. All right, so now this is all about our about. Now after this we are going to create certain paragraph elements. So right beneath the div, that means right beneath this particular div, we are going to create certain other div, and they too are going to have the same class name as this, that is column md6. So right beneath this, let's create another div and give it a class name that is going to be equal to col md6. All right, now inside this div we are going to have a paragraph tag, so let's create a paragraph tag now, and this paragraph tag is going to hold the class name, and that is lead. Now you might have guessed it, what is going to go inside this paragraph, the same lorem ipsum. Now after this paragraph tag, let's create another same paragraph tag with the same class name, and so paragraph, why don't we just copy this, so copy and paste. All right, so these two paragraphs are going to contain our lorem ipsum text. So now I need you to actually come out of this particular div that is our column md4, and just let's come right out of it, and let's create another div. So this time again we're going to create another div, and this is going to be of class name that is going to be equal to row and having a margin top and bottom of 4. All right, so now we are having this particular div. Now inside this div, what we're going to have is another div. So let's create another div, and this is going to have the class name similar to what we had named above, and that again is called md6. All right, so now inside let me just so now inside this div we're going to have paragraph tags again, and they're going to be just like this. So let's copy them and paste them again. All right, so these are two paragraph tags that we are having inside of our another div of class name called md.6-6. Now after this, uh, let's come out of our div, and inside this let's create one more div, and this is going to have a class name that is going to be equal to call md6. Let me just close this now. All right, so now inside this div we are going to have an image, so let's just copy this again and paste it inside our call div. So let me just paste it. All right, so now this is all about our about section. Now if you're wondering why haven't I imported React, is it going to affect my application if I just don't do this? That is import React from React. Well, since the introduction of ES16, that is, we are in no longer requirement to import React from React manually inside the Create React App application. It has already been done for us, so it really doesn't matter whether we import React from React module or not. But yeah, it's a healthy habit. All right, now let's just hit save. Now we are also in requirement to export this function, that is our about section. So let's export it as well. So export default, that is our about. All right, so now we are ready with our two components, that is our home page as well as our about. And here is where the simplicity ends. Now after this we'll be covering certain topics that will require full attention. So let's just close off these and start with our next topic. All right, so now we are done with our about.jsx as well as our context.js. Now we'll be getting really busy with some of the most critical features of our application. Now I need you to install certain other libraries that we'll be using inside of our application, and they are namely yup as well as yeah, the name is yup. So what yup is basically, it's a JavaScript schema builder for passing and validation. That means as you might have seen when you are on certain applications, they ask you that when you are entering the wrong email address, for example, if you're entering your name but you're not putting up @gmail.com, then they might say to you that enter a valid email address. So that's a kind of validation that we need inside of our application, and I'm really opposed to the idea of using regex to do it manually. So we'll be using yup for our schema building as well as our validation. um, if you are familiar with JOI, then you might know what yup does, but if you're totally unfamiliar with them, then don't worry, we'll be talking about them in detail. Apart from up, we are also using Formic for our form creation. Now to install these two libraries, you just need to run npm install uh, yup as well as Formic. So just install them and they will be installed successfully inside of application. And once they are done, we'll be starting with our application. Now before we do this, let me just hit enter. Now it is going to install yup and Formic for me. Let me just close this. Now before we move into our contact form, what we'll be doing is that we'll be creating up validations. That means what sort of messages should show up and what all we are going to have in our contact form. For that purpose, let's create another component inside of our form and name it validation. So this is going to be inside the form. Let's name it validation.js. The name is self-explanatory what it does. Now yup has successfully been installed, so let's import this. So we'll be importing yup from yup. So let's import all as yup from the library yup. All right, so now we are importing it. Let me just save this. Okay, so now let's create our contact schema. So we'll be creating a const and let's name it schema. Let's name it contact schema. All right, so this is a contact schema. Now this is going to be an yup object. Yup dot object All right, so now this object, now let's define what is the shape of our object. We want it of shape. Now what all we need inside of our contact form? We need their email address, their full name, as well as the message that they want to send, and their phone number, and a website URL. So inside this yup.object.shape, now inside this shape, let's build up our schema. So we are going to have full name. Now this full name is supposed to be a string, so yup dot string, and inside this we're going to pass in the message that should pop up if they are not entering a valid full name. So if, for example, if they're not entering a valid string, then the, or if they are just clicking on it and leaving that particular blank and empty, then what should pop up? It should say that enter a valid string, enter a valid string. All right, so this is the message that should pop up. Now, is this required? Yes, this is. Without this, we won't be accepting the form. So required, and the message that it should show should be required. All right, so we are having a schema for our full name. Now, apart from full name, we are also having an email address. So let's make an email. Now this email is supposed to be a string because every email is a collection of strings. So yep, it should be a string. Now what if the person or the user is not entering anything? Then we want this to prompt enter a valid email, a valid input. That means you need to enter it. Enter a valid input. All right, so now it should be a string, as well as it should be a email. That means we needed to have an at the rate as well as email provider's name. So enter, and this is what all yup is going to handle it on its own. We do not need to worry about them. Otherwise we'll have to manually create a validation as well as text fields and all that stuff, but thanks to yup, it's all easy for us. So enter valid email. All right, so now after this is also a required field, so it is required. And yeah, it's required. All right, we are having a full name as well as our email. Now there are three other parameters that we need. One of them is message. What is the message that the particular person or the user is sending? So this is again going to be a string, and it is a required field. So this again is the string. So yup dot string, and this enter a value, enter a valid input, and it is also required, so we want this to be required. All right, so now we are having these three inputs. Now after this we'll be adding two other additional inputs, but they won't be having the required field, and those are basically our phone as well as website. So phone number, this again is going to be a string, a collection of integers basically. So yep, this again is a string, and enter a valid input. All right, now after this let's create the third field, and this is not required, I mean isn't required. And after this the fourth field, and that is our website. So if they have one, they can enter their website. So yep dot string, and this again is going to say enter a valid input. but these aren't required. But if they are entering some values, then they should be validated. It should be some like uh, random integers or something that's not a string. All right, so this is all about our contact schema. Now we have created this, but we are also in requirement to uh, export this. So let's export it for now. So export default contact schema. All right, so we have successfully created as well as exported our validation. As you might see, my prettier seems to be working. All right, so now everything is complete with regards to validation. Now we'll be moving into a contact form and making it. So now as we have completed our validation, now I'll be moving into a contact.jsx. So if you have made this particular file, which I found out that I haven't made it, so just make a contact file as well as a contact.jsx component inside of your components folder and head there. Now your libraries must have been installed by now. So you can actually check them inside of your package.json file. So if you just move into your package.json, you might see that you're having your yup as well as your formic. Okay, let me close this. So now we'll be starting off with our contact form. Let me just open up validation as well because we'll be needing it for reference. So validation. Now to open up files in this particular format, you have to just press Ctrl plus P inside of Visual Studio Code. Now let's import React from React first of all. I know I have already told you that we are in no requirement to import React from React, but yeah, it's a healthy practice to do so. So let's import React from React. Now after that, we'll be importing one module from the formic, that is useFormic. So useFormic, and this is coming from our formic library. So formic. All right, now after this, we'll be importing a schema, that is a contact schema. So let's import our contact schema. And this is coming from our components folder inside from form. So let's import it from there. All right, so now one particular issue that I'd like to address, and that is, do I need to name it contact schema just because the reason that I named it contact schema inside of my validation file? Well, the answer is no. You can actually name this anything. You can name it Doritos if you want. It's totally up to you. You can name this particular file anything. The only thing that matters is that what you are actually what is the file path, as well as whether this file is being exported or not. So since we are exporting it, and that is default schema, so it really doesn't matter what you actually call it over here. You can call it Doritos or Dora cake, you can call it anything, but for the sake of my own sanity, let's call it validation schema. And this is going to be contact. This is going to be an arrow component. All right, so now inside of this we'll be using our formic, and we'll be needing certain constants for that. So let's create a const, and this is going to be using a useFormic. So useFormic. Now inside this, we're going to pass it with certain parameters, and those we're going to call as initial values. So initial values, and this is going to be equal, this is going to contain, this is basically an object that is going to contain certain parameters, and those are particularly full name. So initially we want the full names to be empty string. Basically all the parameters is going to hold an empty string. So full name and empty string, as well as it is going to have all the parameters that we have inside of a validation. So if, let me just move into my validation.js. So we are having a full name, an email, a message, as well as a web phone and website. So these are all the parameters that we're going to have. So full name as well as our email, that is nothing but an empty string. And after this email, let's have a message. So message, this again is going to be an empty string. So message, an empty string. And after this message, phone and website. So phone, this again an empty string, and website. All right, so these are all the initial values that we are having. Now you can take a look at the useFormic API in the Formic documentation, as well as we'll be creating some functions. So let me create a onSubmit function that we'll be using as a constant. So just after this initial values, let's create a onSubmit function or onSubmit method. So onSubmit, this again is going to be taking up some values, and once it has those values, we'll be creating an alert. Hey there. All right, so we are on submit, we are having these values, and after this let's declare our reset form. And just after this we are going to pass it with our validation schema. So now let's pass it with our validation schema now. All right, now let's head up and we'll be supplying it with all the constants that we are having, and that is our handle submit first. So handle submit, and after this handle submit, give it values, and after these values a handle change method. So handle handle change method, and error, so we are having these errors, and touched, and after this touched we are having our handle blur. So handle blur now, and reset form that we are using inside of our onSubmit. So reset form. So this is all about our application at the moment. Now after this, what you're going to do is that we'll placing a return statement. So let's create a return statement now right beneath. So return statement, let me just scroll down so that you can see it. Return, and this return is going to have a form, as you might have expected. So this return is going to have a form, and this form is going to have an onSubmit, and this is going to have this is going to take the value of handle submit. So handle submit. All right, let me just close this. Okay, so this is a form. Now inside this we're going to create certain divs and certain containers. So our first div, this is going to hold a class name of container. So give this a class name that is going to be equal to container. Class name that is going to hold the value of container. All right, so now inside this we are going to have an h1 tag that is going to be having a class name that is going to be equal to display4. So display, and again I'm just repeating this. If you need to take a look at these bootstrap classes, feel free to visit the documentation website. It's really nice. You can get what is actually happening with display4 and all these stuffs. Now this is going to have contact us. All right, now right outside this h1 tag, let's create another div. This is going to be nested div. So div of class name that is going to be equal to row. Now inside this div we are going to have another div, so let's create another div with the class name call. So now inside this div we are going to have another div with the name form group so let's create form group, and this is going to be my form group. Form group, as well as it is going to have a margin top and bottom of 2. So margin top and bottom 2. All right, so now inside this we're going to have a label, so let's give this a label as well, and this label is going to, let me close this. All right, so now inside this label we are going to have a name, and this is going to have a span as well. So span, okay, let me give this a class name of text danger. So text danger, let's close this. Now this span is going to contain a star. Okay, after this label let's create an input field, and this input field is basically the inputs that we are going to give to a form. So let's create an input field. Let me just scroll down a little bit. So this is the first input field. All right, and they give this a class name as well. So this is going to have a class name that is going to be equal to form control. So form control. Let's close this. All right, so now apart from having a class name, it is also going to have a name that is going to be equal to you guessed it, full name. And after name it is also going to have a placeholder that's going to stay enter your name, and after this placeholder it's also going to have a value. So the value is going to be equal to values dot full name. All right, now after this value let's give it an on change as well as on blur. On change, handle change, this is going to have the property of the method handle change. And after on change let's give it on blur even. So on blur, handle blur. All right, now this is supposed to be a self-closing input. We do not need this closing tag. That is supposed to be a self-closing. All right, so now this is going to contain our input. Now if our errors dot full name, it's supposed to be errors. Now if our errors dot full name as well as double ampersand touched dot full name, that means if both of them are true, that means there are errors, as well as they have touched, that means they have entered some value, or they have touched that particular input field. If both of them are true, then we want to show them what sort of error that they have made, that is if there is any. Okay, so if these both are true, then what we want is that we want it to give it let's give it a div and as well as a class name that is going to be equal to text danger again. So text danger, and this text danger, so it is going to have a text danger. Let me just close this as well. Now if there is an error, let me show this error dot full name, and if there isn't any, then we want to just return null. All right, so now we are all clear. Okay, it should be errors, not error. Okay, so now this is basically our first input. Now let's move on and make a second input. Alright, so now we have made one particular input field. Now let's create another one. So get out of this particular column and we'll be creating another div with the same name column. So let's create another name with the call. Alright, so a div with the class name being equal to call, and after this, inside this, we're going to have another div with the class name form group. So right inside it, let's create another div with the name form group. Alright, this is also going to have a margin top and bottom of 2. That is basically the vertical margining. Now inside this div, we'll be having a label. So let's give it a label now, and this is, let me close this. Okay, so this label is going to contain a span. So we're going to have a closing tag as well. I was waiting for that to close, but seems like it isn't working. Okay, so this is email, and let's give it a span. In span is going to have a class name that is going to be equal to, so class name that is going to be equal to text danger. So text danger. Alright, so the span is going to have a star on an asterisk. Now after this asterisk, let's come down, and right beneath our label, let's have our input. Okay, it's not input, it's input. Now this input is going to have an autocomplete of none, so give it an autocomplete of equals to none, and a class name that is going to be equal to class name that is going to be form control. So form control, and after this class name, a name that is email, and after the name, a placeholder that is going to state what's the purpose of this particular input field, and that in this case is that the person or the user should enter his or her email. Enter your email. Alright, now after this placeholder, let's give it the values, and these values are coming from our email, so these are values.email. Now after these values, we are going to have an on change and an on blur. So on change is none other than handle change, and on blur is handle blur. Alright, so we are having our on change and handle blur. Now this is a self-closing tag, so let's make it one. So alright, so here is our input. Now just like its predecessor, it is also going to have some conditional rendering of errors. So okay, if there are errors, the email if there exists, and our email has been touched, that means the user has touched this email, touched our email. If these two are true, then what do we want is that show them if there exists any error, and if there isn't any error, then just return null. So let's create a div, and this is going to be of class name danger, text danger. Alright, so this is going to be of class name text danger, and if there exists any error, or I must say errors, and then we want to present our user with those beautiful errors if there are any email, and if there isn't, then what we want is that. Alright, so these should be actually surrounded in brackets. Alright, and if there isn't any, then we want to present gracefully null. Alright, so this is all about our email. Now after this, alright, so there should be a question mark, not a double ampersand over here. Silly mistake. Alright, so now it's correct. Let's put update here to work. Okay, so we have successfully created a second input. Now we'll be moving out of our div with the class name row, so that means we're moving out of this particular div that is row. So let's move out of it. So a 1, a 2 and a 3. So now set up this div. Okay, so now we'll be creating a div with another class name of row. So let's create another div of class name row. Now inside this div we are going to have, as usual, a class name of column. Now inside this column, let's have another class name of form group. So form group, and this is also going to have a margin top and bottom of 2. Now after this, let's give it a label. Now this label is going to have phone number. Let me just scroll down a little bit. Okay, so this is going to have a phone number. Now this isn't a required field, therefore we won't be using asterisk or that particular span. Now after this phone number, come right outside of this div, and this is entirely optional for the user, not for the coder. We need to actually make them as well. So input autocomplete, and this again is going to be none, and type of number. So none, and this is going to have a type that is going to be equal to number. Alright, so now after this type, let's give it a class name, and it is our all-time favorite, form control. Now right after this form control, let's give it a name, and that is none other than phone. Alright, now after this phone, give it a placeholder as well to specify its cost. So enter your phone number. Alright, now for this placeholder, values, and it's none other than values.phone. So values.phone, and after this values, give it an on change as well. So on change, that is handle change, and after this on change, give it an on block. This is more than handle block. Alright, so now our phone is complete. I'll give this a self-closing tag. Now this is optional, that means it's totally up to user, but we are not going to accept any sorts of garbage value. That means the user just can't enter anything into this. For that purpose, we'll be having conditional rendering errors. So if there are any sorts of errors dot phone, if there exists some errors, and double ampersand, the user has touched them and hasn't entered anything. So touched dot phone. So if these two are correct errors, then what do we want is that if this is correct, then we want to present our users with those particular errors, and if not, just return them null. Alright, so inside this, let's have a div of text danger. So text danger, and this div is going to contain the errors. So errors dot phone, errors dot phone, and if this is not the case, just gracefully result or return them null. Alright, so now let's put update here to work. Okay, so here we are having our phone now. Now let's come out of our dev of class name call, that is right after the second closing there, and let's create another dev with the class name call. So call, and inside this another dev with the name form group. Now inside this form group we are going to have a label. This again is not that important or required field inside of our application, but we are using them. Okay, so this is going to have the label of website. Alright, so let's come out of this particular label and give our input. So we're going to have an input, and this input is going to have an autocomplete of none. So autocomplete, not capitalized, autocomplete of none. And after this autocomplete, give it a class name now. So class name, that is going to be equal to form control. And after this class name of form control, give it a name of website. So a name that is going to be equal to website. And after this name, a placeholder now. So placeholder, that is enter your address. That is basically the location of the website or the URL of the website. Okay, so it should be URL, I guess. That's pretty much accurate. So enter your URL. Alright, so after this placeholder, let's give it values. So values, as you might have guessed what they're going to be, they're going to be equal to values dot website. And after this values dot website, we're going to also provide it with certain other parameters, that is on change and on blur. On change, this is going to be equal to handle change, and on blur, handle blur. Alright, so these are the two functions that we're providing with it. Okay, so after that, this is going to be a self-closing tag as well. So input is self-closing. Alright, so now let's check for error. So if errors dot website exists and double ampersand someone has touched our website input, it should be errors. So that means touched dot website. If these two are correct, then what we want is that then we want to create a div with the class name text danger, and this is going to contain the respected errors. So errors start website, and if that's not true, then we want to return null. Alright, so there goes our concern with our website. Now let's come out of our row div, that again is after these three. So this is a row. Alright, seems like we did a mistake, and that is we were supposed to be inside this particular div. So let's cut this and move inside of this particular div. So all you need to do is just place this div beneath these two. So let's just close this and cut this div over here and bring it. So alright, now we are at the last input field, that is going to be basically a text area. So the first step that involves this will be doing the same thing that we have been doing for past 10 to 15 minutes, and that is creating a form. So let's create a row. This is going to be of class name div, a row and a div. Okay, now after this another class name, a div of class name column. So let's create this, and inside this particular div we are going to have another div with the class name form group and of my2. Now let's create a label now. Inside this particular label, this is a required field because we need messages. So label is going to be messages and an asterisk inside span. So let's create an asterisk inside span and give this a class name of text danger. All right. Okay, let me remove this extra span. Okay. Now after this, a text area, this time we are not using an input field. Instead, we are using a text area because it's only logical, because this one is a message, right? Now this is going to have certain parameters. One of them is number of columns, that is going to be equal to 4, and number of rows, that is going to be equal to 5. And a class name that again is going to be equal to form control. And after this, a name that again is going to be equal to message, and a placeholder that says enter the message that you want to deliver, and an onChange property that's handle change, and a default value that's values.message, and on blur as well. So give this property a on blur, that's handle blur, and text area comes to an end. After this, we are going to conditionally render any sorts of error if there are, and if errors persist and that error.messages and touch.messages is true, then if this is the case, then we want to gracefully create a div with the class name text danger and return those particular errors of messages. Now after this, if this is not the case, then we want to just return null. All right, now we are complete with our form. The only thing that remains, or the only piece of code that remains inside of our contact.jsx, is that we need to create another div with the class name row, and that is going to contain the button to send messages. So if I just head up, so here is my div of class name row, and if I let me just come down. All right, so I need to come out of this div and create another div. So let's create another div, and this is going to be of class name row. So let's create a div of class name row, and inside this row we are going to have a column. So let's create a div of class name call, and inside this call we're going to have a button. So let's create a button that is going to send our messages. So let's create a button in it. So button, and this button is going to have a class name of button and button doc. So give this a class name, and that is going to be equal to btn and btn doc, as well as my2 and width of 25. So give it my2 and width of 25. All right, and this is going to be of type submit. So give this a type that is submit. Let me close this, and this is going to contain the message submit message. All right, so we have successfully created our form. All right, there is this extra button. Let me get rid of this. All right, so our form is complete now. Okay, that was a lot of work. Now we also need to export our contact. So let's export our contact as well. So export default. Contact. So now our contact.jsx is complete. Now we'll be heading into our other components, which are relatively shorter to create. So let's get started. So now that we are done with our two components, that is our contact as well as validation, which includes our contact form. Now we'll be moving on to our users, which is going to map each and every data component for a single user. All right, so before we do that, there are certain dependencies that we are in requirement to install, and those are namely our Axios in order to fetch data from an API. And apart from Axios, we'll also be installing React Router DOM. That's the main concept of this project, so that how we can navigate between pages. So we'll be installing these two dependencies, and to install them is really simple. All you have to done is just this simple command, that is npmi react router DOM. So react router DOM, as well as Axios. All right, so if you haven't used Axios before, this is similar to what you call to as fetch, the default of JavaScript in order to get data from an API. So this is what we'll be using. Now hit enter, it is going to install, and once it's installed, it is going to show up in your JSON file. All right, so now I'll be creating a users.jsx. So let's create a component that is users.jsx. So now I'll be creating a user. Now there are certain hooks that we will be importing from React. So let's first import React from React. Import React from React. Apart from this, we'll also be getting up one lifecycle method, that is one lifecycle hook, that is useEffect hook, as well as the useState hook, so that we can retain data into a state. Okay, so let's import our useEffect as well as our useState. All right, so now after this useEffect hook, let's import our Axios from Axios. All right, after this we'll be importing certain components from our React outer DOM. So let's import them. We'll be using link from our React outer DOM as well as use route match. All right, so these are coming from our React outer DOM. All right, so that's all that we need for now. Apart from this, we'll be also fetching our use theme method. As you might recall, we have created it inside of our use context, that is our context object. So if I just go into my context.js file, so inside this we are exporting these use themes so that we can theme of our application. So that's what we're fetching inside of our users.jsx. So let's move down and fetch our data. So inside the users.jsx, let's import our use theme. And since that's not a default export, therefore we'll be needing curly braces to import them. So use theme from, that is this particular file is coming from our source or the root. So let's get it from our source. My auto import doesn't seems to be working for now, but let's leave it like that. Now let's create a const, and this is going to be users. Now this is going to be exported as well, so let's export it. So export default users. All right, so now we're exporting it as well. Now put up a return statement. So return. Now inside this return, we are going to have the body of a user. But before we do that, let's create our use states as well as define a states that we'll be needing inside of our application. So we are having a const, and this is going to retain the number of users that we are getting, as well as a setter function to set the number of users that we have got. All right, so this is going to be equals to use state, and initially we want the data to be nothing but an empty array. So let's just place an empty array in this. All right, now after this a state for loading. So this particular state is going to be there. So we are using the loading state. You might have guessed we'll be using this loading state for the time being in which our data is being fetched from our API, because it's not going to be like this that once we make a call we'll be getting the data instantly. It is going to take some amount of time, and we'll be using during that particular interval of time we want the loading screen to appear. So that's why we are using this loading. So set loading is going to be set a function, and it is going to have the default value of true. So use state, and this is going to be equal to true. Fetch this use state over here. Then easily, as I have also imported React, I could have just said react.useState. These are basically similar. So you can do either way. You can actually either manually import them from React module or use this this structure. It's basically the same. Now apart from this, I could also use like React. Now I'll be using a lifecycle hook, that is the useEffect hook. But before we do that, let's create a const and state our URL from which we are getting our data. So this is our API that I'm going to mention now. So we are getting our data from this JSON placeholder. It is going to return to us users data that is going to contain several fields. Feel free to check it out. It is going to return to you users data. Now this is the URL in which we'll be making our API request to get our data. Now I will be using let's create a const, and this is going to be URL. So now what this const URL equals to use route match is going to do, so use route match is going to match the route of the URL that we are getting. After this, let's create a const, and this is going to be equal to theme, and this is going to equal to use theme. All right, so we are importing our use theme from our context file. All right, now after this we'll be creating up a lifecycle hook, that is the useEffect hook. And as I've already told you, the 3 use cases of useEffect hook: when you want it to render every time there is any change, when you want it to render only just single time. So let me just repeat that. So basically there are 3 use cases of useEffect hook: when you want it to render every time, or just once when the component is being mounted, or every time there is a change in certain type of state. So let me just show it to you again. So this is the useEffect hook. The first example is when we don't pass any parameters. This is going to run every time, or render every time. Every time it's gonna render. And if you just pass it with an empty array, then this is going to render just single time, and that is when the component is being mounted. So this is going to be rendering only single time. And if you just pass it with a parameter and pass in it, for example, loading. So whenever the state of loading is going to change, that means whenever we are setting it to true or false, and every time there's a change in this particular state that is loading, it is going to render. So these are basically the 3 use cases of useEffect hook that we'll be using. All right, so let's get rid of this. So inside the useEffect hook, we'll be using Axios. So right inside it, so axios.get get URL. So basically this is the URL on which we are making a get request. And if this request is successful, then what we want is that then we want a function that's gonna get some response and take that response and set the user's data. So I want you to take that particular response and set users. All right, so we'll be setting up users with the data that we are getting, that is response dot data. All right, so we are setting our users, as well as when we have got this data, that means when we have successfully gotten the data and we have set it up the users, then we want to set the loading status to false. So what we're going to do after this, we will be setting our loading status, that is set loading to false. All right, so this is our promise chaining. We could have either used async and await, it doesn't really matter. So all right, so now we have used this. Let me just save this. So now let's add code to our return statement. So let's create a return statement for now. So this return statement is going to have a div with the class name container. So basically this is the parent container. So let's create a parent container. All right, so inside this div we are going to have h1 tag with the class name display -4. So this one is going to be an h1 tag with the class name display -4, and inside this we're going to have the text users to let the users know that this is the user screen. All right, so now after this, let's have a div of class name row. So this div is going to be of class name row. Now inside this div, we are going to conditionally render the state, that is whether the state is loading or not. That means if we are still fetching the data from our API, then we want to show the users that yeah, the data is being loaded, you have to wait. So if loading is true, and if you might recall that we are having a state for loading inside of our use state, that is loading. So if loading is true, which at the moment is, so we will be rendering a conditional statement. So if loading is true, then what do we want is that then we want to display a div. Now this div is going to be having a class name that is going to be equal to display 5. So let's give this class name of display hyphen 5. All right, seems like my display. Alright, so here is a div with the class name display hyphen 5. Now inside this, let's put up the text loading. Alright, now if loading is false, then we want to put up an else, and inside this else we are going to have another div. So let's create this else now. And what if this is the case? What if our loading state is false, which eventually it is going to turn to false once our data has been loaded? Then we want to map the data to our user component. So for that purpose, let's create a mapping. So users, which is going to be an array of data that we're going to get from our API. So here is our users. Now users.map, we are going to map this data, and each and every time a user is going to take out data, and this is going to have, now this is going to return something, and therefore we are going to put this inside brackets. Now let's create a div with the class name call md-md-3. Alright, so now it is also going to have a class name of margin top and bottom of 2. Alright, so now inside this we are also going to have another div. So let's create another div, and this div is going to be of class name, let's create a div first, and class name, let's put up the class name. We are going to put up class name inside of backticks. Now inside this, let's put up card, because the class name is eventually going to change, and therefore we'll be changing the theme as well. So class bg, and put inside them theme. Alright, so this is our next div. Now inside this, let's create another div. Let me close this one as well. Alright, now inside this div, now what you see over here, card bg with $theme, this is a template string. Now inside this, we are going to have this property, I mean to say that the class name card and bg theme. Now CSS file is what we already has been provided to you, so all you need to do is that copy the app.css content and paste it inside your app.css or index.css, and therefore the styles that are going to apply to it is going to change as per what kind of background we are having. If we are having the light background, then there's a different style for that, and if you're having a light background, then there's a different style for that. Now inside this, let's have an image. So let's create an image. So what's called, all right, so I need to put up, all right, so now let's have an image, and this image is going to be having a class name of w100. All right, so this is our image. Now this is a self-closing image. We'll be putting up a source. Feel free to put up any sorts of images that you want over here, from Unsplash or maybe Pixabay or any other image that you can find on the internet. And let's give this an alternative name. So the alternative name over here is, let's just name it users photograph photo. All right, so here is our image now. Now after this, what we are going to do is that we'll be getting out of our div. So all right, there seems to be a mistake. This particular image is supposed to be inside this div, so let's put it inside over here. Okay, so let's put it inside this div and get rid of this extra div that's over here. This is in no longer requirement. Now after this, okay, so let's get out of our container div for our image, and let's create another div. So this is the container image All right, so now let's get out of this. And inside this, we'll be creating another div with the name card body. So let's create a div with the name card body, and we are going to get messy inside this because we know Prettier is going to do our work. All right, so now let's put our Prettier to work so that it can organize things for us. All right, so it has organized it for us. So now inside this card body, what we're going to do is that we'll be creating a h5 tag with the class name pl-2. So an h2 tag with the class name pl-2. All right, so now inside this, we're going to have more class names. So this is going to be also holding a card title. So pl2 and card title. All right, so now inside this h2, what you're going to have is the username. So now this username is what will be parsing from our users.map. So let's put up user.name. All right, so this is our username. So all of our data is going to map, and each and every time there is going to be a username, and there's going to be following parameters which we are about to mention now. So after this username, what you're going to have is a list element. So let's create a unordered list after this, right after this h2 tag, or h5. It should be h5. So let's create an h5. All right, so now inside this after this h5, let's just create an unordered list. Now this unordered list is going to have a class name of list group. So let's create an unordered list, and this is going to have a class name of list group. So list group. All right, so this is a URL tag. Now inside this, give it also class name of my-3. All right, so now we'll be creating our list tags, that is our li tags. So let's create a li tag, and this one is going to be holding the class name list group user. So let's create a li tag with the name with the class name list group. All right, we'll be putting up a strong tag inside this strong, and this strong. Oh, there's an extra one over here. Let's get rid of this. All right, so now inside this strong, what we are going to have is a text that state the username, and right after this strong, let's put up a username. So this time we are going to put up user.username. So right above here, as you see, that this is the actual name of the user, and this is the username of the user. So there are two names. One is the actual name, and another one is the username. Now right after this li tag, what we're going to have is we are going to create another. So we are having this div, we are having a username. Okay, that's sufficient. All right, so now let's come out of our ul tag, and now we'll be using another library. So now we'll be using this link component from our React Outer DOM to link to that. So we can link that particular card to other element. So let's create a link tag now, or I must say link component. So let's create a link component. It is the link that we're getting from our React Outer DOM, and this is going to have a class name that is, it should be a link. Give this a class name that is equal to btn and btn outline danger. So btn outline danger. All right, let me close this. This is not a self-closing tag, and it is going to hold up the data to where we want to go. So we want to move to this particular address, that is, so again we'll be using the template string backticks and ampersand URL, and after this a backslash, and we'll be going to the user ID. So user.id. So this is the unique address that we want to go to. Now we haven't set it up the routes yet, but we'll be doing them as soon as we finish up with all the other components. So for that, till that moment we have to wait. So let me just close this. All right, so this is a link component. So when the user clicks this particular link that says that show me more details, then we want a to direct our users to this particular page. So show me more details. Show more details. All right. So this is our tag, and here is all about our users component. Now let's move to our user. So now that we are done with our users component, we'll be moving into our next component, that is our users.jsx. So just move into the next component, but before you do that, let's just close all of these tabs. That's our user as well as our context.js, because we are in no longer requirement of them. We have completed them fully. So let me just close them, and after this we'll be creating up a new component inside of our user.jsx. Alright, so let's create up a user.jsx. So user.jsx. Alright, so this again is going to be a functional component that is going to fetch our data as well as have some states, and this is no surprise to you that since this is a functional component, therefore we'll be using the useState hook to manage our states. So let's first import React from React. Alright, so we are importing our React from our React module, and after this we'll also be needing Axios in this, so let's import Axios from our Axios module. So import Axios from Axios, and after React we'll also be using the useState hook as well as the useEffect hook. So let's just import them as well. So useState as well as useEffect. Alright, so we are having a useState as well as a useEffect hook. Now we will be using the useParams method from React DOM. So let's import that as well. So import useParams, and this is coming from our React router DOM. So React router DOM. Alright, so now after this we'll be using our theme, that is a use theme from our context.js, and if you are unable to recall what it is, let's just head back into our context.js file, and inside this you might recall that we have exported our use theme. So we'll be using this. So let's head back into our users component and import our use theme method. So use theme, this is coming from our context file that lies in the source directory. So let's head over there. So alright, now we are importing all the things that we need inside our application. Let's create up a functional component. So this is going to be function user. Alright, so inside this we need certain piece of state, that is to set up our user. So let's create a const user as well as a setter function for this that is going to set this user. So set user, as a convention we are going to use set user as the setter function's name, and the default value that it is going to use inside this is nothing but an empty object. So use state, this is just going to be an empty object. As you might recall that we are having an empty array inside of our users file that is mapping this data. inside the users.jsx file will be dealing with a single user. So let's create this, and after this we'll be setting up the loading screen as well. So let's create a const and loading and set loading, and this too is going to have an initial state of true, so use state, and this is going to have an initial state of true. All right, now after this let's create a const id, that is the particular id of a user. So const id, this is going to be using use param. All right, now after this we'll be creating a theme, so const theme, and we are getting this theme object from use theme. So use theme, so all right, now we'll be setting up the lifecycle hooks, that is a use effect hook. So let's create up a use effect hook, and inside this will be posting up will be getting our get request so that we can fetch the data from json placeholder typecode.com. So let's create a use effect hook, and as I have already mentioned the three use cases of the use effect hook, therefore we'll be dealing with the third case, that is we want the data to change any time and every time there's a change in an id. So whenever there's a change in an id, we want this hook to re-render. So inside this we'll be passing it with a second parameter, and that is going to be equal to id. So provide it with an empty array and pass an id. All right, now let's come inside this, and we'll be using axios for a get request. So axios, let's paste the url over here, that is our https json placeholder.typecode.com.user. As well, we'll be supplying it with dollar, that is pound sign, and an id, and this is supposed to be a template string, therefore we'll be using the backticks. So let's provide it with backticks instead. All right, so now we are good. This is our axios request. Now after this, if this is the case, then let's do a promise chaining. Then what we want to do is that then let's create a function, and this function is going to take up a response. So function, and this is going to take up a response, and this response is what is going to be acting as a template to set a user. So inside this response, what we're going to do is that okay, there should be a period over here. All right, so now this response that we're getting is going to help us set a data of the user. So set user, and inside the set user, let's pass it with the response that we have got. So response.data, response.data. All right, so now we are setting up a user as well. All right, now after this all is true, then finally what we want to do is that we want to set the loading screen to false. So set loading screen to false. That means we have gotten all sorts of data that we needed. Now you can actually remove that loading spinner maybe. All right, so this is what our use effect hook is going to do. Now we are all done with this. Now let's create a return statement over here right beneath our use effect hook. So return, and inside this return we're going to place up a div that is going to have a class name of container. So let's create a div of class name container. container row, and inside this div we are going to have h1 tag. So let's create an h1 tag, and the name, there's going to be no class name for this, and this is going to contain the user details. So this is basically the user details section, user details. All right, so now after this what we're going to do is that we'll be conditionally rendering. That means if the loading state is true, then we want to show up loading, and if it isn't, then we want to render some other divs. So let's create a two curly brackets, and inside this, if loading is true, then what do we want is that then we want to render a div, and this div is going to be, all right, so this div is going to have the text loading, and if this isn't the case, that means we are not using loading, then we want to render some other text, and this is going to contain a div of class name container row. So this again is going to be holding a class name of container as well as row. Now inside this div we're going to have another div of class name col-md-6. So col-md-6, all right, as well as let's apply it with some other class name, that is my2 -2, and inside this, so what you're going to have is that a div of different other class name, that is card. This time also we'll be using a template string because of theming. So let's create a card. So let's create a div first of all, and this div is going to hold the class name that is going to be equal to, this is going to be template string, so let's give it backticks, and inside this it is going to have card as well as a background and a £sign and theme. All right, so this is our div. Now let's close this. All right, so now we are done with our template string. Okay, so after this, what we're going to have inside of this particular card body is a div of class name card body. All right, so after this card body, we are going to have an h5 tag of class name card title. So let's create a h5 tag of class name card title. All right, and supply it with pl-2 as well. So pl-2. All right, now inside this h5 we're going to have a user's name that we're getting, so user.name. all right, so now let's head out of this h5 tag and create an unordered list that is going to have a class name of list group. So head out of this h5 tag and let's create an unordered list that is going to have a class name of list group. So list group. All right, and supply it with my3 margin top bottom of my margin top bottom 3 -3, and inside this unordered list we're going to have an li tag with the class name list group user. So it's going to be an li tag of class name list group user, and inside this list group user what you're going to have is a strong tag. So let's create a strong tag inside this. All right, so inside the strong we are going to have the username. So user name, that is going to be user.username. So user dot username. And now let's head out of this particular li and create another li. This too is going to have a class name of list group user, but this time we'll be showing up the email. So li dot list hyphen group hyphen user, but this is going to have a strong that's going to specify the email. So strong, and this is going to supply it with the email. So let's dig in with the email. So email. All right, let's get rid of this extra one. Okay, we are going to supply it with email now. So right beneath the strong tag, let's give it this email. So user.email, user.email, and after this li, we are going to have another list of ul that is another list. So let me just scroll down for the while. Okay, so okay, now this another list is also going to have a class name of list group. So let's create another list, and this, the class name is list group. So let's create a list group and supply it with my3. So my3, and inside this cl we are going to have address details. So let's give it a strong that specifies the address. So give it the address for now. Okay, and we're going to supply it with the address of the user. So that says that user dot address But wait a second, I don't feel like as if we are going to have address. We are going to have address in the form of street names as well as the place where the particular person is living. So we are going to have this strong, and inside this we are going to have another li. So let's create an li tag, and this li, I really wonder why I'm having these two closing tags over here. Perhaps because I'm having two extensions to do the same work. Okay. So this is going to have a class name that is going to be equal to mx-2, and inside this li we're going to have a, a strong that's going to specify the street. So this strong is going to specify the street. So let's put up a strong now. So strong tag that's going to specify the street on which the user is living. All right, so now after this let's put up the user dot address dot street. So address dot street, this is where user is living, and after this we'll be giving it the address is suit. So after this li, I come out of this li and create another list of class name mx-2, and inside this create a strong tag. So strong, not string, strong, and inside the strong let's give it with all right. So it feels like the error has been removed. So suit, and let's apply it with the user's address dot suit. So user dot address dot suit, and after this li let's create another li that's going to specify the zip code of the user. This again is going to be an li of class name mx2. So mx-2, and inside this li we're going to have a strong, and this strong is going to specify. Okay, so we are having that error again. Seems like it's randomly popping up. After the strong, let's create a zip code. So zip code that's going to be equal to user address dot zip code. So user address dot zip code. All right, so here it ends the address. Now we can come out of our unordered list for the moment, and after this we'll be creating up the phone number or the contact details of the user. Okay, so let's create up a list tag again, and this is going to be an li of class name list group user. So let's create up an li with the class name list hyphen group hyphen user hyphen group hyphen user. All right, now after this let's create, inside this we're going to create a strong. So strong, all right, so let's get rid of this extra one. Okay, so inside the strong we are going to have a phone number. So this is going to be a label, a kind of label for our phone number, more a kind of direction board. And after this let's put up our user's phone number. So user dot phone number. So this is the phone number of our user. All right, so we'll be creating up another list tag. For now, let's just copy this and paste it. Perhaps maybe we'll be just changing some templates. This is going to be for the website. The rest of the things are same. We are going to have just website over here rather than having phone. So website, this is basically the details of the website of the user. And after this it is also going to change this, that is user.website. All right, so here comes the end of the data of the contact information. Now after this let's create up another unordered list. So right after the list tag, let's create an unordered list. This is going to hold up a class name of list group and empty2. So let's give it a class name of list group and empty hyphen 2. All right, okay, seems like it doesn't work. So group and give it empty hyphen 2. All right, now inside this we are going to create a strong that is going to define the company details. So let's create up a strong tag, and that's going to state the company details. So company details. All right, so this is the company details. Right beneath the strong, let's put up our company details that is going to be presented in form of different list tags. So we'll be creating up an li tag, and this li tag is going to have a class name of mx-2. So li tag of mx-2. Now we are going to have 3 of these, so let's copy them. We'll be copying this and pasting them 3 times. All right, so they are going to be same but with different strong and the different specific details. So inside the first one, or perhaps I must have copied it after putting up strong. Okay, so inside this let's put up a strong tag. All right, so this is the list tag that we'll be using 3 times. So let's copy this and keep pasting them for 1, 2 and 3. Okay, now inside the strong we are going to have initially the name of the company. So let's put up the name of the company, as well as after the strong we are going to have the user dot company dot name. So company dot name. All right, and after this, let's come to the second strong. And inside the strong, we're going to have uh, the catchphrase of the company. That means the company is going to have a particular catchphrase. So catchphrase. All right, so now let's put up the catchphrase of the company. So user dot company dot catchphrase. All right, so this is the second detail. Now comes the third and the last one. Now inside this, we're going to put up the BS. So strong BS. All right, so now let's put up the user dot company dot BS. So now let's come out of this particular div, and we'll be creating up another div of class name call md-6. So we're going to create another div of class name call hyphen md-6. All right, as well give it a my-2. Now inside this div, we're going to have a div of class name. Again, it will be using a template string. So let's create a div, and this is going to be a class name, and as a set rule, we'll be using curly braces, and template to create a template string we'll be using backticks, and this is going to be basically the image thumbnail. So img thumbnail img hyphen thumbnail, and inside this thumbnail you're going to have background as well, and a pound sign as well. Inside this we're going to supply it with theme. All right, so now let me close this div, and inside this div we're going to have an image tag. So let's have an image tag, and this image tag is going to have a class name of card hyphen top card hyphen image hyphen top, and this is a self-closing image. So supply it with a source, maybe any sorts of image on Pixabay or Unsplash or any of these platforms. It just should be an image, as well as an alternative name that can be user photograph. All right, now after this, what we're going to do is that right beneath your image tag, we're going to have a paragraph tag as well. So let's create up a paragraph, and this paragraph is going to have a class name of text center. So class name that is going to be equal to text hyphen center. All right, as well as supplied with lead. So lead and empty hyphen 2, and inside this paragraph tag we are going to have the username. So give it username user dot name. All right, now let's put our pretty to work, and we are entirely done with this user segment. All right, so phew, that was a lot of code. We are also in requirement to export this because we haven't did that. So let's export default user. So all right, this is all about a user's component. So now this error.jsx is a component that is going to be called whenever our users try to navigate to a page that doesn't exist. So if they just try to navigate to a page that isn't in the directory, then this page is going to show up and give them a pathway to head back into the home page. So let's create a functional component, but before we do that, let's import React from React. That is a React from React module. And after this, let's import the link, because this is going to help us to redirect our users back to the home. So you might have guessed where it's coming from. It's coming from React router DOM. So all right, now after this, let's create a function. This function is going to be nothing but error. this is a functional component, and won't be using anything. It's really fairly and simple. So put up a return statement, and inside this return, what we're going to have is a div of class name container. Alright, so inside this container, let's place a h1 tag now, and this h1 is going to have a class name of display4. So give this a class name of display hyphen 4, and inside this h1 tag, we are going to have the message that states that there's no such page. Alright, and after this, let's provide a link back to the home. So we'll give it a link, and this is going to be directed to our home page, whose address is nothing but a simple backslash. And this is going to have this is a link that's going to contain the text go to home. Go to home. Alright, so this is all about our error page. Now let's export it as well. So export default error. Alright, so now we are all done for the day. The only thing that remains is making the routes inside of our app.jsx. So that's what we are going to do for now. So let's save this and head back. So now before we move ahead and create routes inside of application, this step is absolutely necessary that we need to take into consideration, and that is we need to wrap our app.jsx inside of browser router so that we can actually route inside of application. So we'll be importing the utility, we'll be importing the browser router from our React Router DOM. So let's import the browser router. So browser router from our React Router DOM, here it is. Now let's wrap our entire app as well as a theme provider inside of browser router. So that's what you're going to do. So browser router, let's wrap it inside of browser router. Alright, so here again we are having these 3 browser routers, but we just need 2. Alright, so now we are all good. Now we should be able to route inside of application. So let's head into our app.jsx, and first of all import all those things that we are going to need inside of our application, as well as we'll be using certain icons that what we'll be installing at the moment. So open up your inbuilt terminal by pressing Ctrl plus backtick, and we'll be installing those particular dependencies or libraries. So run the command npm install, and those dependencies and libraries are Font Awesome, React Font Awesome, as well as Font Awesome freeload solid svg icons. So let's install npm install @Font Awesome /React Font Awesome, as well as the other library that we're using is again Font Awesome, as well as the other library is Font Awesome free solid hyphen svg icons. All right, so these are all the these are the 2 libraries that we're using inside of our application to create. So just hit enter and it should install into your system. So now let's close this and import all the other libraries that we are using. So from our React Router DOM, we'll be importing certain libraries. So we are importing from our React Router DOM. All right. From our React Router DOM, we are using our NavLink, and you might have guessed what this is for, to create the navigation, because till now we haven't created any sorts of navbar. That what we are going to do inside of our app.jsx. Now after this NavLink, we are also using our router, or basically I must say route, to create routes, as well as switch. So these are the 3 These are three modules that we are using from our React Auto DOM. Now after this, we are using a sun as well as a moon icon. So let's import them as well. So import font awesome icon from our @font awesome React icons React font awesome. And after this, we are importing the moon icon from uh, font awesome free solid SVG icons. So we are importing our far moon from our font awesome free solid SVG icons. Alright, so now after this, we'll be importing each and every component till now we have made, that is our about, our contact page, as well as our use theme method, and the error page and home and user and all those components that we have made. So let's import them. So we are first importing our about page. So our about page is coming from components. So that lies inside this directory. So components, inside the components we are getting it from about, and from about we are downloading or importing our about.jsx. All right, so this is our about. Now after this, all right, it should be from and after this about, we will be importing our contact page. So contact, and this too is from components, so let's import it. After components, contact, and from contact we are importing a contact.jsx. all right, and after this contact we will be also importing our home and users. So we are having our home page and our users. So import home page, that is coming from again our components. And after the components, our home page, and from home page we are importing our homepage.jsx. And after this home page, we'll be also importing our users as well as our user. So let's import our users. This is coming from components, and from components it's coming from users and user. All right, so after this, the last component, that is a user component. And this too is coming from our components. And from user it's coming. All right, so now we are importing all the components that we need inside of our application. Now let's create our application, or basically the last component, that is our app.js. Now get rid of this div, and we'll be using a use theme. So let's create a const and name it theme, and this is going to be equal to set theme, and these two are going to be equal to set theme, and these two are going to be equal to use theme from our context, which we haven't imported yet. So let's import our use theme from our context. So import use theme from our context.js. all right, so we are good now. Let's get rid of this. All right, so use theme Now after this we'll be creating up the return. Let's get rid of this entire div, and this time we're going to have a div with the class name app, and this too is going to be a template string. So let's create a div. So this div is going to be of class name that is equals to, and this is a template string, so backticks app bound theme. So now this is the parent container, and before we actually make up the navbar, let's create our routes. And for that purpose, we'll be using the switch. So let's create a switch, switch switch, and inside the switch we're going to have the different routes. So the first route is going to be for our home page, and the path of this route is nothing but a simple backslash, and the component that it is going to lead to is this backslash is going to lead us to our home page. Alright, so this is the component. Alright, so this is the first route that we have created. After this, let's create other routes. The next one is going to be for a contact. So let's create another route for contact. Why don't we just copy this and paste it again? And the path is contact, and the component is contact. And after this, let's copy and paste again. This time after contact, it's going to be for our about page as well as our about. And after this, we are having our home, our about. Now we need the users page that's going to display the sum of all users. So route and a path that is going to be equal to backslash users, and component that is a users component. And let me just close this. All right, now we are going to use specific ID for our users that's going to take us to individual user. So again a route, let me paste this. All right, now the path is going to look like users and an ID, and this time we'll be going to individual users. All right, so now we have created almost everything. The last thing that remains is the catch-all route that's going to be rendered anytime and every time our user is going to a page that doesn't exist. So route path, this asterisk means all. If it doesn't exist, then we want them to head towards our error component. All right. So now we have created all the routes that we need. The only thing that remains at this moment, or the only piece of code that remains at this juncture, is the navbar code. So let's create that as well. So come right beneath our div, and inside this we're going to create another div. So let's create another div, and this div is going to have an anchor tag. So let's create an anchor tag. And this is going to have an href, that is the reference. Give it a hashtag, and after this href, let's give it an id that's equals to btn theme. So this id is btn theme, and after this let's give it a template class string. So the name or the class name that's equal to a template string, therefore backticks and float hyphen start and theme hyphen button and hyphen pound theme. All right, so this is our href or the anchor tag. Now on every click, that means whenever someone clicks on this, now you might have guessed what this is. This is the theme changing button. So whenever someone clicks on this, you want to set the theme and toggle between the light and the dark theme. So on click, set theme, and if theme double equals, and this is JavaScript, so if theme triple equals a light, if this is true, then we want to toggle to the dark theme, and if this is not the case, then we want to switch to light theme. So this is pretty much what this anchor button is doing. Now let's close this as well. Let's put Appreciate to work. All right, so this is our anchor tag. Now this shouldn't be a self-closing. We also need to supply it with our moon icon or the font awesome icon. So let's supply in between our font awesome icon that we are importing. So font awesome icon, and the icon that we're using is the far moon. So let's put it equal to far moon. All right, so this is our icon. Now after this, we'll be creating our nav links or our nav. So let's create them. So after this anchor tag, let's create a nav tag, and inside this nav we are going to have an unordered list, and inside them we are going to have a list elements. So this is going to have an ul, and inside this we're going to have li. So let's create an unordered list as well as list tags. So first we're going to have unordered list, and inside them we are going to create list, now. All right, and this is going to have a nav link. All right, so this nav link is going to have an active class name. So let's give it an active class name that is equals to active element new. So that's generally basically to define which element is active or not. So active element new. And this is going to be directed to home page. So nothing but a simple backslash, and inside this we're going to have home page. All right, so let's get rid of this extra one. So this is our first nav link. Now after this we'll be creating subsequent nav links, so let's just copy them and keep reversing them. So second nav link, and a third, and a fourth. So one is for home page and other is going to be for our contact page, and after this contact page for our about page, And after this about page, for our users page, now we also need to change these particular routes. So let's do that. So we're going to have home page and the contact page, as well as our about page and the users page. Now this is probably the extra, so let's get rid of this. Alright, so we are all done for the day. We have successfully created our application. Now let's take a look at it inside the browser and see how it's running. So alright, now we have completed the application, but the only step that remains is to add CSS into application. I know we are using Bootstrap, but yeah, we need to import a CSS module so that we can use it. For that purpose, you have to just import bootstrap css and bootstrap.css. This is the only file that you need to import so that our bootstrap can work properly. At index.js, this is where you have to import it. Now hit save. Now we are also having CSS into our application, and for that purpose just move into your index.css and copy all the CSS that's in here because we won't be needing it, and remove them. So just remove this entire CSS and head to the CSS file that has been provided to you along with this course and paste this CSS file over here. So there are a bunch of CSS, and I really wonder in a React course whether we should be discussing about CSS or not. So just copy and paste this because these are nothing but basic CSS files. So I don't feel like as if there is any need to explain them because the name was self-explanatory. Now let's hit save and make sure that our index.css is being imported into our index.js. So let's head to our index.js file now. And yeah, we are importing our index.css, and that completes our application. Now let's just hit save and start our app development server and see whether the application is running or not.